Greetings to everyone. It's fantastic to be here. I love the beginning of these things. It's always got such a sense of hope and excitement. But Bernard, we were here a year ago this month talking about and launching the Big Shift framework that we then set up and started to do a whole lot of work around, and that was a really exciting conference. But from that, one of the 5 key things we talked about was the real importance of telling stories, which is why we're essentially doing what we're doing now. And I'm really glad my mic is working. Great. So the first thing I really want to acknowledge is that pulling these events together takes a lot of energy, and it also takes a lot of support. So AU2 Business School, thank you so much for hosting us. You've hosted us a number of times, and it's fantastic to be in this great auditorium. I also want to acknowledge Air New Zealand, who have brought 2 of our 3 keynotes out. We've got Matthew and we've got John, who are going to be speaking throughout the day, which is great. Without their support, we couldn't do this either. Also want to acknowledge our media partner, Element, and there are a stack of other really important players, including ThinkStep and the Auckland Council, who have made this day happen for us, and there's a lot of endorsing supporters who have also helped. We've got a tremendous amount of people who've been practicing speeches, who've also put in a lot of effort. So thank you everyone for your massive collaboration. Now what I'm going to be doing today is a bit of a pitch. And my pitch is to really focus on why you do what you do. And I think this is absolutely vital, and I don't think we do enough of it, actually. I think we're in a massive time of change, and talking about the why we do what we do is more critical than ever. So I'm going to run through a bit of a presentation that starts to talk about some of that stuff in a bit more detail. And I'm also going to reference a few people that I've always been inspired by who are really good at getting to the nitty-gritty of why they do what they do. So the first thing, I think, and I'm hoping that some of the common ground between all of us in this room is because we all care deeply about a bunch of issues. I've put up some mega trends there, and this is really broad, but within that, there's probably stuff that we're really passionate about. And this stuff is probably driving us really hard in the work that we do. And if you're actually not being able to hit your passion point, I really hope that you find a way of doing that, because it's such a great driver. But all these points up here are our points of commonality. What I think we're not so great at doing, and I'm going to try and encourage you to spend more time doing this in the future, is focusing on why these things are important and telling that story a bit better. The reason why I want you to do that is because partway through this century, we're going to have 9 billion people on this planet. We've already got so many issues to deal with. If you think about climate change, if you think about access to good food, to clean water, to energy, imagine that with 9 billion beautiful people on this planet also wanting access to that good stuff. This means we have to rethink what we do. It requires a massive amount of rethinking. It requires a lot of inspiration. It requires a lot of inspiration within the private sector and within the public sector. It also requires a hell of a lot of motivated, innovative people to come up with new and better ways of addressing this stuff. So, how do we do this in a much more inspiring and compelling way? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But before I do that, I thought I'd start with my own little bit of a story about SBN, because I'm going to break that down into 3 separate bits. I'm going to talk about the why we do what we do, talk quickly about the how, and then finish with the what. This is called the Golden Circle. A guy called Simon Sinek talks about it. If you haven't seen his video, I highly recommend you do. But I'm going to also explain a bit more about his logic. So first of all, SBN. Chris Morrison, who's in the audience, and I started this organisation about 13 years ago. And what we believed was there were a hell of a lot of massive issues out there in the world that needed to be addressed. We also believed that business was the most powerful, the most bright-eyed, and the most excitable set of folks that were probably going to be able to drive this the fastest. So what we thought we would do was to start coming up with what's the advantage for New Zealand. So we spent a little bit of time working that out, and we worked out that New Zealand is one hell of a lucky country. If you look at us, we're an island nation, and we've got all these natural assets. That means that we can test, develop, and really start to create solutions for a world in need. We believed that we could create a really good earning for this nation by exporting fantastic solutions to the globe. We also believed that we could start to import some great ideas from the other smart people like Matt and John and Alicia, bring that here, make it work for us, and then if we do it better, we can send it back out there and make more money from those great ideas. We also felt that how we would need to do that was by pulling together like-minded business people and people from other parts and sectors, including the public sector. Then we thought what we needed to do was to start coming up with a set of really clear indicators for our nation on what we thought New Zealand could lead on. And this is what we talked about last year, and we came up with these 4 really important places that New Zealand could lead, and then what that's meant in terms of our work is a bunch of really fantastic projects. We look at waterways, we look at food, we look at circular economies, we look at transport stuff, and we focus on, what's the 4th one? Community. And so we've got, through the why, through the work that we do, we've pulled together the most amazing team of people. They are so passionate, they work such long hours, and they do that because they really believe in our why. And they're very good at explaining their why too. So now, if you're still not really convinced, I'm just going to ask a quick question. How many people have seen Simon speak? That's fantastic. Who's seen it really recently? Great. I'm going to do a quick summary for those of you who haven't and a reminder for those who have. What Simon basically has done is spent quite a lot of time looking at inspiring leaders around the world. And what he's noticed is that there's a bunch of things they all have in common. And basically what they're very good at doing is explaining why and getting people excited about what they're doing. He calls this the golden circle. He's pointed to it in this picture. It starts with why, it goes to how, and it ends with what. Now what he says is those inspiring leaders who are really, really good at what they're doing always start with why. They get to the moral purpose of what they're trying to achieve. Whereas leaders who are okay at leadership tend to focus on what. They tend to focus on what you need to do, but they don't really get to the point of why. And that's a critical difference, because what he also says is that people don't necessarily buy into what you do, but they do buy into why you do it. And if people buy into why you do it, you can change what you do more easily. And that's really important when you think about sustainability, because that's a journey. We don't get to a fixed point with sustainability and go, we've sorted it out, we're there, we know what to do. We're constantly morphing how we do this stuff. The other thing that he does is he brings up 3 fantastic leaders, which I'm going to quickly remind you about for those who've seen it. The first ones are the Wright brothers. Now, these guys changed the future of aviation. They were fantastic. There were 2 guys essentially working from a bike shop in a small town in the States. These guys were not well funded and they weren't very well connected, but they were super passionate about being able to fly. They were in competition with a guy who was well funded and who was incredibly well connected and also really wanted to be the first person to fly. But we know the story. We know that the Wright brothers did it. Those 2 boys did it because they knew why they wanted to do it. They were passionate about why they were doing it. They weren't doing it for money and they weren't doing it for fame. So that was their critical point. They knew why. The other story he talks about is the civil rights movement in the United States. And what he talks about is the difference that Martin Luther King managed to make for this whole movement. At the time of the civil movement times, there was a hell of a lot going on. There were lots of people talking about the need to change. And Dr. Martin Luther King was the only person who really understood why they needed to change. He also knew you needed to start something that was uniting, something that was really bold, and something that was long-lasting. So he started a movement. He started bringing together a massive number of people in a time where there was no social media. And he brought those people together and managed to do his I Have a Dream speech and really change the future of that nation, which was amazing. He always started with why. The other example he uses is Apple. Now, Apple was started by the 2 Steves, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. Woz was the guy who actually started Apple. He started Apple because he believed that you could get personal computers into the hands of the individuals, then they'd be able to compete on a level playing ground with corporations. That's why he did the personal computer. That's what motivated him. So what he did was he built the first one, and that was the Apple I, and then he built Apple II. The problem was he was only really addressing the innovators. He was only addressing the early adopters. He couldn't get past that chasm. So it wasn't till he came in partnership with Steve Jobs, who really wanted to create a massive, effective business, that those guys really got cracking. So in their first year together, they managed to build the company to sell $1 million worth of product, and by their fourth year, they sold $100 million worth of product. So they met their goal. And they've always focused as a company on the why, and they've always challenged the status quo because of that. And people love them and they watch them. So if you look at these three examples that he talks about, the thing that these guys have been massively good at doing is inspiring people and getting people to stay with the journey as they go through because they focus on their why. Now, what's interesting is that he's compared this with how our brains work. And what he says is the golden circle is essentially how the brain works. Leaders tend to work from the inside out. What they do first is they stimulate our limbic system. They get people excited about what they're doing. And then once they've stimulated the limbic system, got you emotionally involved, then they start to give you the reasons to justify that behaviour that you're now starting to do through your neocortex. That's why talking from the why is the most important way to start. The other point is that if you're trying to make changes in an organisation, it's really important to make sure that you get to the why all the time, quickly, because that means that people will follow you on your journey, and they'll work really hard if they align and believe in your why. I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a help, because I know that some people in the room don't have clarity on why they're doing what they're doing, and I know that because we work with some of our members on this stuff. We've developed a really simple framework to start helping you get to your why, and if you need some help, please let us know. But essentially, it looks at these 4 different areas. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on them, but they are all helping you get to make sure that your purpose is clear and that you can articulate that clearly with others. One of the useful things is to look for others. If you don't know what your why is, look for others for inspiration. And one person that I often look to for inspiration is the lovely John Elkington. And John Elkington was the first guy who came up with the triple bottom line, which started a lot of this stuff in the business space. His latest work is called the Zero Noughts. And basically what he's trying to do is articulate those fantastic leaders who are alive, some of them, apart from Ray Anderson, now. And they're breaking the sustainability barriers with a whole lot of new ways of doing things. Here's a list of about 50 amazing organisations and individuals. So if you want some inspiration, spend some time looking at that, because the kinds of changes we need to come and address this 9 billion people is enormous. So if you haven't sorted out your why, I highly recommend that you do. And please make sure when you're doing any presentation or trying to convert people to the way that you're thinking, always talk from your heart. Don't always focus on what you want them to do. Focus on why you want to do it. And don't be scared of talking from here, because it makes a huge impact. Now, I hope you enjoy the day, and the rest of these speakers, I'm sure, are going to be phenomenal. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming.